Your automated dividend strategy is quietly destroying your wealth, not in an obvious way, not in a way that shows up as a dramatic loss on your brokerage dashboard. In a way that feels like progress every single month, while your real purchasing power slowly and systematically erodes beneath the surface. In this 2026 inflationary spike, blindly reinvesting into overvalued stocks is a mathematical trap. It inflates your cost basis. It locks you into premium prices on businesses whose fundamentals do not justify those premiums. And it converts what should be a compounding machine into a mechanism that is systematically buying expensive assets at the exact moment when expensive is the worst time to be buying anything. Stop letting your drip run on autopilot while consumer staples trade at historic valuation premiums. You are permanently eroding your total returns, and the most dangerous part is that it feels like you are doing everything right. This video is the mathematical case for why dividend reinvestment plans are underperforming during the 2026 inflationary spike and exactly what to do instead. If you want honest mathematical analysis on income strategy in 2026, rather than the comfortable narrative that everything is fine, just keep reinvesting, hit subscribe. I post this every single week, and this is precisely the environment where the conventional wisdom deserves the hardest scrutiny. And before we go any further, quick question for the comments. Is your dividend reinvestment currently set to fully automatic across all positions? Or do you selectively reinvest based on valuation? Drop your current setup below. I reply to every single comment. Let us start with what is actually happening in 2026, because the macro backdrop is the foundation of everything that follows. An 8% inflation spike is not just a number on a government report. It is a fundamental repricing of every dollar that flows through your portfolio. When inflation runs at 8%, the purchasing power of a dollar earned today is worth 92 cents in real terms by the same time next year. The dollar itself is losing value faster than most dividend yields are generating income. This creates a specific problem for the drip investor. The conventional wisdom on dividend reinvestment was developed in a world where inflation ran at 2 to 3%. In that environment, the real return, yield minus inflation, was positive. You were actually getting ahead. At 8% inflation, that arithmetic breaks down entirely for a large portion of the traditional dividend universe. A stock yielding 3% in an 8% inflation environment is generating a negative 5% real return before any consideration of valuation. The 3% income does not even keep pace with the erosion of purchasing power from holding the position. You are collecting checks while the value of everything those checks can buy is declining faster than the checks are arriving. Automatic dividend reinvestment in this environment is taking that insufficient income and using it to buy more of the same overvalued asset. You are compounding a negative real return. It happens automatically in small increments, so it never triggers the psychological alarm. The consumer staples sector is the most visible example of this exact trap in 2026. Companies like Procter & Gamble or Coca-Cola. The market has been paying premium prices for the perceived safety and income reliability of these businesses through years of uncertainty. The problem is that elevated valuation multiples compress future returns regardless of how strong the underlying business is. When you buy Coca-Cola at 28 times earnings and the historical average is 22 times earnings, you are paying a 27% premium for the same future cash flows. Your reinvested dividend at that price is buying 27% less future income than it would if you waited for the valuation to normalize. Multiply that premium across every automatic reinvestment over a year of elevated valuations, and the math becomes genuinely painful. You are not compounding your way to wealth. Automatic reinvestment feels like discipline. It feels like the responsible long-term investor behavior that every piece of financial education has told you to practice. In 2026, the framing has inverted. The behavior that looks like discipline is actually the behavior that is quietly killing your long-term returns. That framing was correct in the environment it was designed for. In a low inflation world with normally valued assets, the cost basis risk of automatic reinvestment is minimal, because every quarter you are buying at a price that is roughly fair. The compounding works as advertised. In 2026, the framing has inverted. The behavior that looks like discipline, automatic reinvestment regardless of price or macro environment, is actually the behavior that is quietly killing your long-term returns. True discipline in this environment is not the absence of judgment. It is the application of judgment at the specific moment when the autopilot is flying you toward a wall. The real-term purchasing power calculation makes this concrete. An investor with a $200,000 dividend portfolio yielding 3.5% collects $7,000 per year in dividends. In an 8% inflation environment, the same $200,000 portfolio is losing $16,000 per year in real purchasing power. In an 8% inflation environment, the same $200,000 portfolio is losing $16,000 per year in real purchasing power. The $7,000 in dividend income does not even cover half of the inflation erosion. This is what the set it and forget it mentality costs you when the environment it was designed for has fundamentally changed. Automatically reinvesting back into overvalued consumer staples is buying more of an asset class that is failing to protect purchasing power. So what is actually outperforming in this specific June 2026 environment and why? The first is holding cash or cash equivalents selectively rather than reinvesting automatically. 3 to 6 month treasury bills currently yielding 4 to 5% are not an exciting investment, but they are a real return asset in an environment where many traditional dividend positions are offering negative real returns after inflation. Accumulating those T-bill yields in a money market or short-term treasury position while waiting for consumer staples valuations to normalize is not being idle. It is being patient with a specific mathematical purpose. The second is sector rotation toward dividend payers in segments that are actually benefiting from or at least not being compressed by the inflationary environment. Energy infrastructure companies and commodity-linked businesses. Their dividends are funded by cash flows that grow in nominal terms as prices rise. That is a fundamentally different position from owning a consumer staples company whose input costs are rising while its pricing power to pass those costs along is constrained by consumer sensitivity. The third is selective reinvestment, suspending the autopilot and making active decisions about which positions to reinvest in based on current valuation. This requires more engagement than pure automation. It requires knowing the historical valuation range of each position you hold and making a deliberate judgment about whether today's price represents a reasonable entry for new capital. Accumulating the dividend as cash and waiting for a better entry point is the mathematically superior decision, even if it feels less disciplined. Inflation-adjusted income instruments alongside traditional dividend equity. TIPS&I bonds provide income that explicitly adjusts for inflation rather than being eroded by it. These are not permanent replacements for equity income. But in a period of 8% inflation, they deserve allocation alongside the traditional dividend equity positions rather than being dismissed as overly conservative. The fourth is considering inflation-adjusted income instruments alongside traditional dividend equity. TIPS&I bonds provide income that explicitly adjusts for inflation rather than being eroded by it. Here is the broader principle that ties all of this together. Dividend reinvestment is a tool. The condition that makes DRIP most powerful is undervaluation or fair valuation in a low inflation environment. Every reinvested dollar is buying income at a reasonable price, and inflation is not eroding the real value of that income faster than it accumulates. The condition that makes DRIP most destructive is overvaluation in a high inflation environment. Every reinvested dollar is buying income at an inflated price while inflation simultaneously erodes the real purchasing power of the income being generated. The set it and forget it investor who is automatically reinvesting dividends from overvalued consumer staples in an 8% inflationary environment is not practicing discipline. They are practicing inertia. And in investing, inertia is only a virtue when the default path is correct. Right now, the default path of automatic reinvestment across the traditional DRIP universe is the wrong path. Turn off the autopilot, look at what you are actually buying with each reinvested dividend. Ask whether that price and that macro environment justify adding to the position. And if the answer is no, accumulate the cash, rotate toward inflation-benefiting income, and wait for the valuation to give you a genuine reason to buy. The compounding that DRIP promises is still available to you. You just need to be selective enough to access it at prices that actually allow it to work. Now, the question I want from you before you leave: has the 2026 inflationary environment changed anything about how you are managing your dividend reinvestment? Have you turned off DRIP on any positions, rotated into different sectors, or are you still running full automatic reinvestment across the board? Drop your honest current approach in the comments. I reply to every single one. Hit subscribe for weekly honest income strategy that does not shy away from telling you when the conventional wisdom is wrong. Let us build something built on math, not mythology.